Good Monday morning prospect. I'm going to touch on something that I've talked about before, but I'm going to try to come from a different perspective. In a book that I can't remember ever having heard very many sermons from, Ecclesiastes, the writer, beginning at verse 3:1, there is a season for everything and a time for every matter under the heavens, a time for giving birth and a time for dying, a time for planting and a time for uprooting what was planted, a time for killing and a time for healing, a time for tearing down and a time for building up, a time for crying and a time for laughing, a time for mourning and a time for dancing, a time for throwing stones and a time for gathering stones, a time for embracing and a time for avoiding embracing, a time for searching and a time for losing, a time for keeping and a time for throwing away, a time for tearing and a time for repairing, a time for keeping silent and a time for speaking, a time for loving and a time for hating, a time for war, and a time for peace. In everything in this universe, there is a time for it. And one of the things that we don't realize is that we get in a rut. And I think you have probably heard me say this. I know I've said it a lot in the last 20 years. I firmly believe that two of Satan's favorite phrases in church are, "We've never done that before," and "We've always done it that way." Because we've never done it that way before ties your hands. You are always stuck wherever you were. Now, if it was last week, that might not be bad for a while. But if we've never done it that way before, goes back to 1873, then you're probably stuck in a rather antiquated look at the world. And it's real easy to dismiss when the preacher says that. But I have one of my favorite little books is this wonderful book called Boundaries. And Boundaries talks about how we learn to do things because they work. And one of my favorite examples in the book is the kid who is the comic at school. And for a while it's cute, but after a while the teachers get tired of it. But what they didn't know and don't know and have no reason to know is that this particular young man's father is an alcoholic, and when he comes home angry, the way the boy learned to avoid getting on his bad side was to be a clown. And so his reaction anytime there's stress is to be funny, or at least to try to be funny. And you say, well, that's somebody else, that's not me. We all do that. My wife doesn't like conflict. She likes to walk away from it and wait until it's over. I like to resolve things, and I prefer to deal with it right then. Now, I'm not saying that, I'm not trying to talk about my relationships at all. I'm saying we have two different ways of dealing with the exact same thing. And we have had to learn to do new things in order to get along for the last 35 years. Sadly, as a pastor, I see grown people, and sometimes I'm talking about 50 and 60-year-old people who never learned to be anything other than their mother's daughter or their father's son. And it is amazing to look at people who are reasonably successful in their work world, but if their parent walks into the room, they become a 12-year-old child again. They've never learned to have an adult relationship with their mother or father. Boundaries talks about the fact that we have to learn new ways to relate to one another. I grew up in the South. Most of my interactions were with people that looked like me, dressed like me, talked like me, came from the same background that I did. And there wasn't anything wrong with that, but that's not the world that we live in today. So I understand when women say that saying chairman, the word doesn't have any negative connotations for me, but I can understand that for a woman, chairman may have an implication of male domination or male leadership. It doesn't have to be a negative. And there are words that different cultures, anybody younger than me is a boy or a girl. That word has racial connotations to it, so I try to avoid using it. There's nothing wrong with the word, but being open to being different means you think about what words mean and what our actions are saying to us. When we look at involving young people, several people here are trying to get young people involved in the church. Well, a question that I want to ask is, what are you inviting them to do? And I'm not making a comment on what's being done. This is for the purpose of this blog. If we're inviting people to help us, we're doing it for the wrong reason. If we're inviting people to allow them to worship God the way they want to, and I'm not talking about doctrine or dogma. I love the hymns from the old Cokesbury hymnal. I also love a lot of the old hymns from some of the old Baptist hymnals. And a lot of those songs have gone out of favor now. But a lot of the hymns in the Methodist hymnal have gone out of favor now. And a lot of the things that are popular are new in the sense that they're only 30 years old. A wise person told me that I needed to pay attention to the culture. I needed to listen to the music that the young people listen to. I needed to see the movies they saw. I needed to understand who they were going to concerts to see. And at the end of the day, what I'm talking about is, are we, as a church and a society, permission givers or gatekeepers? Permission givers means that we look for reasons to say yes. even if we don't understand necessarily what's going on. We are willing to allow others to do their thing. Gatekeepers control. If you use it literally, the person who controls the gate controls the flow of people in and out. The gate can be opened wide and you feel good about yourself. And if you don't like it, the gate can be closed and you have controlled the gate by shutting it. I'm never going to be a gatekeeper. I don't want to be. But there is a connection with boundaries and gatekeepers. The young people, well, no, the adults who never learned to have an adult relationship with their parents are always having to ask permission. Adults who learned to treat their parents and parents who learned to treat their children as adults are permission givers. They allow one another to be human and to fail or succeed, and they don't force people into boxes. I want Prospect to be a place that is permission giving. And that's when I talk about Sunday school, permission to, if you're ready to do something new, do something new. Always remember that traditions have a purpose when they become traditions. But maybe they don't have purpose anymore. So I challenge you as we are forging our way into this unknown world that we're now living in. Ask yourself, are you protecting your territory, or are you seeking to journey out into the unknown? I challenge you to come with me on a journey to the unknown. I think you'll find it very rewarding. God bless you, Prospect.